Hey guys, welcome back to another peaceful journey through history. Tonight we're going to drift back over 2,000 years to ancient Egypt to explore the remarkable life of one of history's most captivating figures, Cleopatra, the seventh Philopator, the last pharaoh of Egypt. We're going to approach her tale in a gentle, contemplative way, focusing on the rhythms of ancient life, the serene beauty of the Nile, and the timeless patterns of human experience that can carry you into restful sleep. So get comfortable, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's sail together down the Nile to ancient Alexandria, to understand not just a queen, but the world she inhabited and the people whose lives she touched. Picture the Nile River as it was over 2,000 years ago. Not just any river, but the very lifeline of civilization itself, flowing north through the vast desert like a ribbon of silver and green. The sound of its waters is constant and soothing, gentle lapping against the reeds, the soft splash of oars, the distant call of ibis birds overhead. Along the riverbanks, papyrus reeds sway gently in the warm breeze, their feathery tops catching the light like green fireworks frozen in time. The air is filled with the sweet scent of lotus blossoms floating on still backwaters, and the rich, earthy smell of fertile mud that has nourished this land for millennia. In the early morning, as the sun rises over the eastern desert, the Nile becomes a mirror of gold and pink, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it's hard to tell where water ends and heaven begins. Fishermen in simple reed boats cast their nets with movements as rhythmic and ancient as the river itself. This is the Egypt into which Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE, a land where the patterns of life had remained unchanged for over 3,000 years. The flood season still came with reliable regularity. The harvest followed its ancient schedule, and the great temples stood as they had for centuries. In the capital city of Alexandria, these timeless Egyptian rhythms blended with the cosmopolitan energy of the Mediterranean world. The city sat like a jewel, where the Nile Delta met the sea, its white limestone buildings gleaming in the sun, its harbor filled with ships from every corner of the known world. At Alexandria's heart stood the great lighthouse, the Pharos, rising over 400 feet into the sky. Imagine standing at its base on a quiet evening, looking up as the lighthouse keeper climbs the internal ramp with his oil and mirrors. The flame at the top flickers to life, and the entire structure becomes a pillar of warm, golden light against the star-filled sky. But perhaps even more magnificent was Alexandria's great library, housing the collected knowledge of the entire world. Picture vast halls lined with scrolls, filled with the gentle sounds of learning, the soft whisper of unrolling papyrus, the scratch of reed pens, the low murmur of scholars discussing ideas in a dozen different languages. Into this world of wonder and learning was born Cleopatra VII in the winter of 69 BCE. She was born in the royal quarter, where Mediterranean breezes carried the scent of salt and distant lands through marble corridors and garden courtyards. Picture the royal palace, a complex of beautiful buildings connected by covered walkways and surrounded by gardens where fountains played gentle music and exotic birds called from the trees. The architecture blended Egyptian grandeur with Greek elegance, with tall columns supporting painted ceilings and floors of polished marble. From her earliest days, Cleopatra was surrounded by languages. In the royal household, conversations flowed seamlessly between Greek, Egyptian, Latin, and the tongues of visiting diplomats. For young Cleopatra, this wasn't confusing, but natural. She absorbed languages like a plant absorbs sunlight. Picture her as a young child, sitting in the palace library with her tutors. The afternoon sun slants through windows, creating rectangles of golden light where she sits cross-legged, a scroll spread before her. Her tutor reads in Greek, but she interrupts with a question in Egyptian, then listens thoughtfully, her dark eyes bright with intelligence. Cleopatra's education combined Egyptian wisdom with Greek learning and Roman practical skills. Her days followed a gentle but purposeful rhythm, beginning before dawn with physical exercise and ending after sunset with music and poetry. In the early morning, while the air was cool and sweet with night-blooming flowers, she practiced in the palace gymnasium. Not for her the confined existence of many royal women, Cleopatra learned to ride horses, to handle a bow, to move with the grace and confidence of someone born to command. After physical training, she would bathe in palace baths, where warm water scented with oils washed away the morning's exertions. The bath chambers were works of art, with mosaic floors depicting dolphins and sea creatures, walls painted with scenes of the Nile in flood. Then came intellectual challenges that shaped her legendary mind. In chambers lined with scrolls, she studied mathematics with the precision of an architect, astronomy with the wonder of a poet, and philosophy with the depth of a sage. Picture her working with a brass astrolabe on a clear night, standing on a palace balcony with her astronomy tutor. The instrument catches starlight as she adjusts its moving parts, learning to read stories written in the constellations. Above them, the Mediterranean sky is brilliant with stars, the Milky Way like a river of silver flowing across the heavens. Most remarkably, Cleopatra became the first Ptolemaic ruler in over 200 years to learn Egyptian, the language of her people. Her ancestors had ruled Egypt for 3 centuries while speaking only Greek. But Cleopatra understood that to truly rule Egypt, one must speak to Egyptians in their own tongue. Picture her at age 10, sitting with an elderly Egyptian priest brought to teach her the ancient language. The room is deliberately modest, decorated with traditional Egyptian art, painted scenes of gods, hieroglyphic inscriptions, simple wooden furniture. The old priest speaks slowly and patiently, his voice carrying rhythms of a language ancient when the pyramids were built. Cleopatra listens intently, repeating phrases until the sounds become natural, learning not just words, but the deeper patterns of thought the language carries. As she grew older, Cleopatra added other languages. She learned Latin from Roman merchants, recognizing that Rome was the rising power that would shape Egypt's future. She mastered Hebrew and Arabic from Alexandria's diverse populations, understanding that a great city's strength comes from embracing all its peoples. Picture her at 14, moving easily through Alexandria's marketplace, speaking Egyptian to farmers selling grain, Greek to Mediterranean merchants, and Latin to Roman traders. Her presence transforms the marketplace, not because she demands attention, but because she gives it, listening carefully to her future subjects' concerns. When Cleopatra was 17, her father died, and she became co-ruler with her younger brother Ptolemy the 13th. Picture the coronation ceremony in Memphis's great temple of Ptah. Morning sun streams through high windows, illuminating walls covered with hieroglyphs, telling stories of pharaohs, stretching back 3,000 years. Cleopatra stands before the high priest, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. The priest chants in ancient Egyptian, "Life, prosperity, health to the Lady of the Two Lands, beloved of Isis, chosen of Ra." Cleopatra responds in the same ancient tongue, her voice clear and confident despite her youth. But ceremonies cannot solve practical problems. Egypt faced challenges that would test someone twice her age. Irregular Nile floods affected harvests. Roman merchants demanded favorable trade terms backed by implied military threats, and powerful temple priests competed for royal favor and resources. Picture Cleopatra in her first council meeting, held in a chamber overlooking the harbor. Through windows, she can see ships that bring Egypt's wealth and problems. Grain ships heading for Rome, merchant vessels from Arabia, Roman galleys whose presence reminds everyone of growing northern power. Even as Cleopatra built loyalty in the countryside, trouble brewed in the royal court. Her brother Ptolemy XIII, guided by ambitious advisors, began to chafe at sharing power. The conflict came to a head when Cleopatra was 21. Rather than face civil war that would devastate the kingdom, she made the difficult decision to leave Egypt temporarily. Picture her final night in Alexandria before exile, standing on a palace balcony overlooking the harbor. The lighthouse beam sweeps across water as it has every night for centuries, but tonight it illuminates preparation and departure rather than routine arrivals. Below, a small ship waits at anchor, loaded not with Pharaoh's treasures, but with practical necessities for uncertain journey. Cleopatra travels light, taking only trusted servants, some gold, and scrolls containing wisdom she might need in exile. The night air carries familiar sounds of Alexandria, calls of night fishermen, creaking of ships at anchor, distant music from harbor taverns. These sounds that have been her life's soundtrack might soon become just memories, and she listens with intensity of someone trying to preserve every detail. Cleopatra's exile took her east into the Sinai Desert, where she established camp near the fortress of Pelusium. The desert had always been Egypt's refuge and renewal. Here, away from court politics, she could build loyal following among Bedouin tribes and plan her return. Picture her encampment in early morning, as sun rises over endless dunes and desert begins its daily transformation from silver to gold. The camp is simple but organized. Goatskin tents arranged around a central area where a small fire burns, providing warmth against desert's surprising chill. Her daily routine in exile develops its own rhythms. She rises before dawn when air is cool and stars still visible, spending the quiet hour before sunrise in meditation and planning. The desert dawn is unlike any other, gradual lightening of eastern sky that seems to come from within the earth itself. During the day, she meets with tribal leaders, Bedouin sheiks, who know every water hole and caravan route from the Nile to Damascus. These conversations, conducted in Arabic around small fires while coffee brews in copper pots, teach her things about her kingdom she never learned in palace schools. In evenings, when desert temperature drops and first stars appear in the vast, clear sky, she studies and plans. By lamplight in her tent, she reviews maps drawn on papyrus, calculating distances and supply requirements, estimating the size of force she'll need to reclaim her throne. While Cleopatra gathered strength in the desert, dramatic events unfolded in the Mediterranean world. Rome was tearing itself apart in civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. This conflict would ultimately determine Egypt's fate. When news arrived that defeated Pompey was fleeing toward Egypt, possibly seeking sanctuary, Cleopatra realized history was offering her an opportunity. Her brother's advisors, thinking to curry favor with the apparent winner, arranged for Pompey to be murdered as he stepped ashore. A catastrophically short-sighted decision. When Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria days later, expecting to find his enemy, he discovered instead that Egyptians had killed a man under their protection. The great Roman general was appalled by this breach of hospitality. In one moment of misguided pragmatism, Ptolemy XIII's advisors had offended the most powerful man in the world. Caesar established himself in the royal palace as mediator in the dispute between royal siblings, but actually as Egypt's de facto ruler. This was the moment Cleopatra had been preparing for, the chance to present herself directly to Caesar, to demonstrate that she, not her brother, was the pharaoh Rome should support. The famous story of how Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence, wrapped in a carpet, captures something essential about her approach to statecraft. This wasn't just dramatic gesture, but calculated demonstration of courage, intelligence, and determination. Picture the scene when the carpet is unrolled in Caesar's chamber, and Cleopatra emerges, not as desperate suppliant, but as confident queen presenting herself to an equal. The room is lit by oil lamps, casting dancing shadows on walls decorated with Ptolemaic treasures. Caesar, now in his 50s, and accustomed to being the most impressive person in any room, finds himself facing someone whose intelligence and presence match his own. Their first conversation, conducted in Greek, covers immediate political situation, but beneath practical matters, both participants take each other's measure. Cleopatra's Greek is perfect, educated, nuanced. She can discuss philosophy with academy scholars' subtlety, military strategy with experienced generals' precision, and economics with deep understanding of theory and practice. Caesar, himself a writer and intellectual, as well as military leader, appreciates this combination. As their initial interview extends into longer conversation, then into evening of discussion over dinner, both begin to understand they have found something rare, political alliance that is also intellectual partnership. They share a vision of leadership that encompasses cultural achievement, economic development, and careful balance of diverse populations. Over following weeks, as Caesar sorted out Egypt's political situation, his relationship with Cleopatra deepened beyond political convenience. Here were two people sharing fundamental approaches to governing, belief in learning's importance, respect for cultural diversity, understanding that true strength comes from people's loyalty rather than their fear. Their collaboration unfolded in practical work of restoring order to Egypt. While Caesar's legions provided military security, Cleopatra used her knowledge of Egyptian conditions to address underlying causes of unrest. Picture them working together in the palace library, maps spread across a table while scribes take notes in multiple languages. Caesar points to locations where Roman merchants complained about customs delays, while Cleopatra explains seasonal flooding patterns, making certain routes impassable during parts of the year. Their conversations move easily between Latin and Greek, with occasional Egyptian phrases when Cleopatra needs to clarify concepts that don't translate well. The attraction between them is intellectual as much as personal. The rare pleasure of finding someone who can understand and improve upon your ideas. In spring 47 BCE, Caesar and Cleopatra embarked on ceremonial journey up the Nile, a royal progress serving multiple purposes. For Caesar, it was opportunity to see Egypt's wealth firsthand. For Cleopatra, it was chance to present herself to her people not as refugee queen, but as pharaoh backed by Rome's power. The royal barge was a floating palace, but also symbol of Egypt's enduring majesty. Picture this magnificent vessel moving slowly up the great river, purple sails catching morning breeze, while teams of rowers maintain steady pace. The barge's cabin is decorated with gold leaf and precious stones, walls painted with Egyptian mythology scenes. At every major town, crowds gather on riverbanks to see their queen, many hearing her speak in Egyptian for the first time in their lives. The fact that she travels with Caesar doesn't diminish her authority, but demonstrates her ability to secure Egypt's interests through skillful diplomacy. Picture one such stop at Dendera, where Hathor's great temple stands among palm groves near the river's edge. In the temple courtyard, filled with sistrums' sound and burning incense's scent, Cleopatra performs rituals her ancestors have performed for 3 millennia. During winter, 47 BCE, as Caesar prepared to leave Egypt for ongoing Roman conflicts, Cleopatra discovered she was pregnant. The child she would bear, Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar, would become both her greatest joy and heaviest burden. Picture Cleopatra in palace gardens on quiet spring morning, watching gardeners tend lotus and papyrus beds while she contemplates the news. She understands immediately that this pregnancy is not just personal matter, but political event shaping Egypt's future. When she tells Caesar the news, his reaction reveals their relationship's complexity. He is pleased. Any ambitious man appreciates prospect of an heir, but thoughtful about implications. A Roman general can have children with foreign queens, but acknowledging such children raises delicate questions about succession and loyalty. Their conversations about the coming child take place during long evenings in the palace library. Caesar expresses hopes for the child's education, combination of Roman practical training and Egyptian cultural depth. Cleopatra shares dreams of a son or daughter who could bridge East and West, creating new possibilities for peace and prosperity. When Caesar left Egypt in spring 47 BCE, Cleopatra was secure on her throne, pregnant with a child who might one day rule both Egypt and Rome, but also facing the challenge of governing Egypt in a world where Roman power was increasingly dominant. When Caesarion was born in summer 47 BCE, the event was celebrated throughout Egypt, but kept carefully private. The child's existence was a diplomatic statement, and Cleopatra managed his introduction to the world with careful calculation she brought to all state matters. During Caesarion's early years, Cleopatra established new life rhythms, balancing roles as pharaoh, mother, and Egypt's primary diplomat with Rome. Her days began before dawn with personal time, meditation, exercise, and quiet moments with her son before rule's demands claimed her attention. Picture her in early morning, standing on palace balcony overlooking the harbor, while Alexandria slowly awakens below. The lighthouse beam has been extinguished for night, but first fishing boats already head to sea, their lanterns creating moving points of light on dark water. Despite ruling Egypt's demands and raising a young child, Cleopatra continued intellectual pursuits that shaped her education. The Alexandria Library remained one of her favorite retreats, where she could engage with ideas, enriching her understanding of the world beyond Egypt's borders. Picture her in late afternoon, after completing official duties, sitting in library reading rooms with scrolls spread before her. Western sun slants through tall windows, illuminating papyrus texts and casting warm rectangles of light on marble floors. Her reading was notably practical, works on hydraulic engineering that might improve Egypt's irrigation, diplomacy treaties that could guide negotiations with Rome, agricultural studies that could increase grain production. But she also continued reading philosophy, poetry, and history, understanding that a leader's mind must be fed by beauty and wisdom, as well as practical knowledge. Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE threw the Roman world into chaos, creating both opportunities and dangers for Egypt. The men emerging as Caesar's potential successors, Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, each had different attitudes toward Egypt and different ideas about its proper relationship with Rome. Cleopatra approached this challenge with characteristic intelligence and patience. Rather than choosing sides immediately, she focused on strengthening Egypt internally while carefully observing the developing Roman situation. Picture her during this period, receiving reports from agents throughout the Mediterranean world. These meetings take place in secure chamber deep within the palace, where maps cover walls and coded messages arrive daily by ship and messenger. She pays particular attention to Mark Antony, who has emerged as Caesar's most likely successor in the Eastern Mediterranean. Antony is responsible for organizing Roman territories from Greece to Syria, which means Egypt's future depends largely on her relationship with him. When Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him at Tarsus in 41 BCE, she understood this encounter would determine Egypt's fate. But rather than simply obeying the summons like typical client ruler, she decided to stage an encounter, establishing her as Antony's equal from the beginning. Picture Alexandria's workshops during preparation weeks, filled with sounds of craftsmen creating props for this diplomatic performance. Shipwrights worked to transform royal barges into floating paradise, their hammers and saws creating rhythmic backdrop to artists' and decorators' more delicate work. Gold leaf is applied to every surface that will catch light, while painters work on Greek and Egyptian mythology scenes that will tell stories about divine authority and earthly wisdom. The perfume makers work in chambers filled with exotic scents, creating fragrances that will transform the very air around Cleopatra's arrival into something memorable and otherworldly. When Cleopatra's barge appeared on River Cydnus at Tarsus, it created exactly the impression she intended. This was not just transportation, but transformation. Conversion of simple diplomatic meeting into encounter with something divine and unforgettable. Picture the scene. A vessel seeming made entirely of gold, its sails purple silk billowing in river breeze, its oars silver catching and reflecting afternoon sunlight. The barge moves slowly up the river, accompanied by sound of flutes and lyres, creating otherworldly musical atmosphere. Cleopatra appeared as goddess Aphrodite, dressed in flowing robes suggesting divinity, while revealing her very human beauty. Around her, attendants dressed as cupids and sea nymphs completed the tableau, creating scene that seemed to step directly from Greek mythology into mundane Roman politics. The crowds gathering along riverbanks to watch this extraordinary arrival understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. This was not usual interaction between Roman commander and client ruler, but something new, meeting between equals confident enough in their own power to engage in elaborate courtship rather than simple negotiation. The first encounter between Cleopatra and Mark Antony took place in pavilion on Cleopatra's barge, surrounded by artificial paradise she had created. Beneath theatrical splendor, this was meeting between two of the most capable people of their age. Picture the pavilion in evening light, silk walls filtering setting sun into warm, golden glow. The air is scented with exotic perfumes and gentle music sound, but conversation between these leaders quickly moves beyond pleasantries to serious discussion of mutual interests and concerns. Antony finds himself facing a woman whose intelligence and presence match his own considerable abilities. Their conversation flows between Latin and Greek, touching on subjects as diverse as military strategy, economic policy, and classical literature. As their initial meeting extends into dinner and then into night of conversation, both participants begin to understand they have found something rare, political alliance that could also become personal partnership, meeting of minds that could reshape power balance throughout the ancient world. Following their meeting at Tarsus, Antony accepted Cleopatra's invitation to spend winter in Alexandria, deepening their partnership and giving him first-hand understanding of Egypt's remarkable civilization. During months in the city, Antony experienced way of life combining luxury with purpose, pleasure with achievement. When Cleopatra discovered she was pregnant again during winter, 40 BCE, the children she would bear, twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, represented another step in her vision of future uniting Eastern and Western traditions under enlightened leadership. But as their personal relationship deepened, political storm clouds gathered in Rome. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir and Antony's rival for supreme power, used news of the Eastern Alliance to argue that Antony had become corrupted by foreign luxury and was betraying Roman interests. By 32 BCE, conflict between Antony and Octavian could not be resolved through negotiation. The two men represented fundamentally different visions of Rome's future. Octavian favoring centralized control from Italy, Antony supporting partnership between East and West based on mutual respect. The decisive battle took place on September 2nd, 31 BCE, in waters off Actium on the western coast of Greece. Cleopatra commanded the Egyptian contingent of Antony's fleet, 60 ships representing Egypt's commitment to their shared cause. When the battle turned against them, Cleopatra made the difficult decision to withdraw the Egyptian fleet, hoping to preserve her ships and soldiers for future campaigns. Antony followed her, but their departure effectively ended the battle and handed victory to Octavian. Back in Alexandria, Antony and Cleopatra faced the reality that their vision of East-West partnership had failed, at least for their generation. Octavian's forces were approaching Egypt, and diplomatic solutions were no longer possible. Picture their final months together in Alexandria, as they prepared for the end they both knew was coming. Rather than despair, they spent their time ensuring that their children would be educated and protected, that Egypt's cultural treasures would be preserved, and that their vision of enlightened leadership would survive even if they could not. Cleopatra used these final months to complete projects she had begun years earlier, ensuring that the great library would continue, that irrigation systems would function after her death, that the traditions connecting Pharaoh to people would endure beyond her reign. When Octavian's forces finally entered Alexandria in 30 BCE, they found a city still functioning, still beautiful, still representing the best of what human civilization could achieve when different cultures combined their strengths, rather than imposing one upon another. Cleopatra's death, probably by poison rather than the asp of legend, marked the end not just of her life, but of an entire era. The last time in ancient history when East and West might have formed partnership of equals rather than relationship of domination and submission. But her legacy lived on in the children she had educated to think beyond the boundaries of single cultures, in the institutions she had strengthened to serve Egypt's people, and in the vision she had articulated of leadership based on wisdom rather than force, cooperation rather than conquest. As we reach the end of our journey with Cleopatra, picture one final scene along the Nile that she loved so much. The great river continues its eternal flow from the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean Sea, just as it did in her time, just as it had for thousands of years before her birth. Along its banks, farmers still plant and harvest according to flood season's ancient rhythms. Children still play in the shallows while their mothers wash clothes and draw water. The ibis birds still call at dawn, and the lotus flowers still bloom in quiet backwaters. This continuity reminds us that while individual lives end, the great patterns of human experience continue. Cleopatra's story is remarkable, not just because of her unique achievements, but because it represents eternal human desires for knowledge, beauty, justice, and connection across cultural boundaries. In her rise from exile to become one of history's most powerful women, in her commitment to learning and cultural achievement, in her vision of leadership that serves people rather than exploiting them, and in her determination to create something lasting for future generations, Cleopatra embodies the best of human possibility. As you drift off to sleep tonight, let yourself be carried by the gentle rhythm of the Nile, the soft whisper of papyrus reeds in the evening breeze, the distant sound of temple bells calling the faithful to prayer. Rest in the knowledge that the human capacity for wisdom, creativity, and hope continues as endlessly as the river that gave life to one of history's greatest civilizations. Sweet dreams, and may you wake refreshed by this journey through time, inspired by the story of a remarkable woman who refused to let circumstances define her possibilities, and who created beauty and meaning even in the face of impossible challenges. The Nile flows on, as gentle and persistent as human hope, carrying the dreams of one generation to the next, connecting past and future in the eternal present of its peaceful, life-giving waters. Sleep well.